All right, everyone, welcome to, I'm going to mute everyone, and then I'll unmute everyone at 7 for the Q&A. And there might be some times we're gonna ask folks to say make a statement or a comment. I'll unmute you, or you can just raise your hand. I can see visually, or you can use the hand feature. If you go to participants, there's a raise your hand feature you can always use if you want to comment when we're asking for folks to comment. So again, hopefully everyone can hear me. Sorry, my voice is a little low today. Again, welcome to our 4th session, Neighborhood Networks This Week in Council sessions. Happy to see you all here today. Again, for folks who just got on a call, we are staying, the session will end just like every other session at 7 p.m., but we're gonna stay till 7:30, standing out to answer some questions. If you have to hop off, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will try our best to answer all those questions in the email that we send out after this session. So we're gonna get started. All right. So again, welcome. I wanted to start with a quote. This is a session about the budget session. I wanted to start with a quote from one of the council members, Councilmember Jamie Gutierrez, a quote she made during the last budget vote after they voted for the last budget. Obviously, a lot of folks were disappointed with the budget, given the global pandemic we were in, to see so many cuts and to see money go into places that they felt like, shouldn't have been prioritized in this time. This quote is interesting because to me, it summarizes basically everything we've been talking about in these last couple of sessions, right? Like the fact that legislation and budget process or government, legislation in general is a tool that we need to be using to create systematic and structural change, but also that it requires that we are engaged in that process in order to do those changes year by year, never taking our eyes off the people who, quite frankly, make decisions about us. It requires us to be in a process continuously, to be involved in the process continuously. The budget process and the legislative process is something we have to commit to, and I think we've been saying that throughout these sessions, to commit to being involved in year after year until, of course, we see the world and experience the world that we envision. The truth is, if you want to know anything about what an elected official thinks or a governmental body thinks about our society, what they think is important, all you have to do is look at the budget. I'm sure we've heard, especially recently, this statement made a lot, that a budget is a more document, but that is the truth. Our budgets are more documents. It is either going to tell us, or it's either going to reflect the best of who we are or the worst of who we are, right? This important document signals to society, and in particular to Philadelphians when we're talking about our budget, what and who we prioritize and seek to protect or uplift. Despite this importance of this document, right, for our communities, for our society, every year, year after year, from education, healthcare, fighting poverty, fighting addiction, fighting gun violence, we as a community are forced to prioritize and what is important in terms of our community's needs, despite the fact that the 1% and major corporations continue to benefit from the system. So we know we deserve more, and it's partly why we're engaging in this process, learning together, like how to fight. We know we deserve more, right? We think that our budget must prioritize human needs like housing, healthcare, food security, and the things we need to live in a healthy and whole life. We have to demand from our elected officials that they care for the most vulnerable in our society and that they invest in our community. In order to do that, though, we need to understand how that process works and how to best get involved. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what is that process? Well, every year, Philadelphia City Council and the mayor must decide how to both raise and spend public money for the following fiscal year. That's the operating budget specifically. This budget functions as a comprehensive plan which allocates exactly how dollar amounts are dispersed to various departments, programs, and issues ranging from trash collections to public transit to education funding to fighting gun violence and addiction. The budget underlines what the government's priorities are for the upcoming year and their vision for the next 5 years, which we'll talk about in a little bit with operating budget and 5-year plan. Basically, the budget dictates what issues and programs will be priorities for our government. To be clear, City Council, and we talked about this, I think, throughout the first couple of sessions, City Council's most significant role in this process is passing the budget with the mayor. That is in addition to them enacting laws, right? Like their most significant function as a governmental body is enacting laws and adopting the city's budget with the mayor. The annual operating budget, for example, covers funds for the mayor and council itself. So they have to pay their own staffers, they have to pay themselves, they have to pay pension, all of that goes into the operating budget. In addition to the various officers, departments, boards, commissions, all of those are things that the budget has to fund. Plus, and I think this is a significant thing to mention, is like, because Philadelphia is the largest city in the Commonwealth and the 6th most populous city in the nation, with almost 2 million people living here, right? Like our budget doesn't just impact Philly, but it impacts the state in a way and the Delaware Valley. Unfortunately though, despite all of this, right now our budget is not completely transparent. And because of that lack of transparency, the budget is often not reflective of the public's wants and needs. The budget should be better reflective of our wants and needs, right? Like it shouldn't be about what elected officials want, but about what community needs. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. It's clear from our last budget, and we'll get into this more, that our elected officials are focused on increasing police presence rather than decreasing crime. And I say that because there's been numerous studies, papers, research that says that the increasement of police officers does not decrease crime. Yet year after year, and before Mayor Kennedy, right, like the police continuously get an increase in their budget. So that's the one thing, right? Like it does not reflect our needs. The second thing with the budget is, and this is to me an important issue, is that the fact that many times after a budget is passed, we still don't know exactly what our money is being spent on. And we'll talk about this a little bit as well, or what the results of those spendings are, right? Because if we did, we would study and look at the police success a lot more, and the budget should reflect whether they're reducing crime and how effective they are on their job. But that is not what's happening. So today we'll talk about what's in the budget, what's not in the budget, and then we'll talk about just some important ways we can get involved in the timeline and how we can take action. And then briefly mention about groups who are doing work around the budget. We're all gonna stay till 7:30 to answer questions, from 7 to 7:30 at the end. So if you can hold your questions or put them in a chat box if you have to drop off at 7. This is being recorded. We will also send it too. So you will get to see the questions answered from 7 to 7:30. Any questions that we don't get to, we will send an email with the answers. So please drop your questions in the chat box. All right, so let's start with some budget conversations. Stan, want to take it away? I'm sorry, I'm going to unmute you, Stan. There you go, you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Okay, thanks. All right, well, hello, everybody. By way of introduction, my name is Stan Shapiro, and for 22 years, I was on the legal staff of City Council, working quite a bit on what City Council could and could not do relating to city budgets. So with that background in mind, today I'm going to do what I can to penetrate the opaqueness of the process for enacting our operating and capital budgets and figuring out what's in them. So when people think of government budgets, they think of legislation that spells out in detail how a particular jurisdiction is required to spend its money. Generally, that is an accurate description of state and federal budgets and some local governments, but not really Philadelphia's. Philadelphia's Home Rule Charter was enacted in 1951 with a key goal of sharply limiting council's budgetary powers. Prior to the charter, council could direct spending to the penny for every department in the city. The result was one scandal after another in which the Republicans who ran the city before 51 exploited their power to engage in a variety of schemes to fatten their wallets. As a result, the charter created the operating budget framework known as lump sum budgeting. And Steve is going to put up a slide which shows you what that lump sum budget looks like. This is one page, which looks like pretty much all the other pages in the budget ordinance that council actually passes. So you'll see the Department of Streets, Department of the Fire Department, they do a lot of stuff, but all you see in these budgets are 3 or 4 line items. Police Department, $727 million, 3 line items. That's all that is really imposed on the police department to spend within those limits any way the mayor and the administration want them to. So there are some workarounds against these limits that have been developed over the years. One of them is for council to appropriate money to itself and then allocate it according to its desires. In this current budget season, council did that, allocating $25 million to itself. It's going to parcel it out. That's not transparent either. It just dumped a lump sum of $25 million into one of its own accounts. Another way is to create special funds like the Housing Trust Fund. The ordinances that created and which modify the fund specify its sources and the standards dictating how the money in the fund is to be spent. Again, that's totally different than what you see right next door here for these departments. And there are other special funds. Most of them involve restricted, automatically recurring sources of revenue, which leave little room for council discretion in determining how the money is spent. Some of these funds are the Water Fund, the Aviation Fund, the Behavioral Health Fund, the Hotel Rental Room Tax Fund, and there are others. There's a Grants Revenue Fund, which allocates revenues that are expected to come in from grants from other governments for a wide variety of purposes. When those monies come in, the mayor asks the council to appropriate those monies back into the operating budget along the same lines as what you're seeing in the slide. In the housing area, the federal government requires, so these are, right, these are, this is a pictograph of the size of the various funds that are in the budget. This is the green, the dark green one is the general fund. You can see that it dwarfs the others. There are many smaller ones. The Grants Revenue Fund, I think maybe, I'm not sure, the print is kind of small, but that's a picture of all the funds that are in the overall budget ordinance. So, so if you put up the housing budget, you can see that that particular budget, which is adopted actually outside of the budget ordinance in another ordinance, does provide detail. It's got a series of hearings. It lays out how the money is to be spent. It's really how the budget ought to look for all of the departments in the city. But because of federal requirements, we do get that detail with the way the city allocates its housing money. Now, there is a very, very detailed budget that's published. It's 2,000 pages. in great detail. Steve is going to put up one page of that. It's a little fuzzy. It does itemize in specific amounts how the mayor intends to spend within those departments for specific purposes and uses. On this page, even though we can't see it that well, the budget detail allocated $34,000 in the Commerce Department for something called the Community Design Initiative. Didn't really describe what that is. And in fiscal 2021, $4 million has been allocated to an authority paid for economic development. Neither of these allocations are found in the budget that council passed. Furthermore, even though the mayor's budget detail, not binding on him, but that detail does drill down into specific spending lines, still, as you can see, a lot is unstated, such as exactly which programs that $4 million for economic development will be specifically spent on. A few other key facts, there's a slide for that. The mayor's budgetary powers go beyond his ability. I'm saying his, he, him, because that's the gender of our current mayor. Hopefully that won't be the case in about 3 years. In any event, Kenny's ability to determine which programs to spend on and in what amounts within the broad parameters of the enacted budget are totally, as I said, they're totally his within those frameworks. But in addition to that, under section 8102 of the city charter, the mayor can simply refuse to spend budgeted funds. For instance, if council allocates $12 million for library personnel, he can choose to spend only $11 million on the basis, real or pretended, that there's a revenue shortfall. Doesn't have to justify it. He just says, no, not spending it. Many of you will remember that Mayor Nutter did exactly that to the libraries after the last financial crisis. Holy hell was raised. He eventually had to curb that, but it was within his legal power to do. There are some other limits on council's budgetary powers having to do with long-term contracts and debt service. The city often enters into long-term contracts that extend beyond a single fiscal year. For instance, for the provision of social services, contracting with various providers around town and out of town. We also have 30-year contracts with the Eagles and the Phillies, requiring us to pay the teams $35 million a year in connection with the construction of their stadiums, basically paying about half of those costs. Those contracts set amounts for future fiscal years that the council is legally bound to include in budgets. We got 19 more years of $35 million a year for the Phillies and the Eagles, and they stink. That's not in my prepared remarks. Similarly, when the city borrows, it is legally bound to pay the principal back along with interest charges without fail every year. Approximately 10% of the typical budget is allocated to debt repayment. Also, it should be noted, the city is obliged to pay into the city's pension fund by state law. That allocation is in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and because of underfunding for years, that requirement is growing. The city and the city and city council do also have some power over school district spending. We're going to have a slide up about that. As it indicates, the city doesn't get to approve or disapprove the school district budget per se, but it does get to decide whether it wants to enact new taxes for the school district or change the rates of existing taxes, and it does that every year. So that's how the city's spending part of the budget works, with a little bit of extra credit for the school district. Now let's look at the revenue side, where the money, all this good money comes from. So on the revenue side, let's start by saying, and this shows you where the major sources are. There are really four that take up 3/4 of this pie: the wage tax, the property tax, the sales tax, and the business tax. Those are the big ones that actually fit comfortably into the pie. And there are a lot of smaller ones, but there are lots of limits on what the city can tax from both the Constitution and state law. I could talk for a while about that, but suffice it to say for tonight that the biggest obstacle to council enacting fair and progressive taxes is what's called the uniformity clause of the state constitution. And that pretty much mandates that the city have flat tax rates on almost everything. So that's why we don't have a graduated wage tax or an income tax, which taxes unearned income. Well, the failure to have an income tax actually has to do with the fact that statutory law also limits what council can do. The main limit on that is a law which says that the city can only tax those things that the state does not tax. So the state has an income tax up there. The wage tax was carved out for us to have, even though there's a state income tax, but we can't have a state income tax which taxes unearned income as well as wages. Now, there are some other taxes that the city has imposed that somewhat overlap with state taxes, but that's because there are separate statutes that were enacted by the legislature to give us those powers. One of them is a liquor by drink tax. Another one is the sales tax. Now, in this current fiscal year, there were efforts to try to get some progressive taxes that are left to our discretion enacted. And these are also the result of specific statutory authorizations. One is the personal property tax. Personal property tax is kind of a mirror image of the real estate tax. Your real estate, if you own a house which is worth $500,000, you have to pay a tax on the value of that real estate. So $500,000 times the tax rate, let's say the tax rate's 1%, it's much more, that would be $5,000. But if you own $5 million of Apple stock, which is value to you, you don't have to pay a dime on the value of that stock. So the state actually authorized us to pass a personal property tax at a very low rate, 0.004%, on that portfolio of stock and your portfolio of bonds. This would be felt mainly by very rich people. It's not a perfect tax because some middle-class people will also have to pay, but the rate is so small that we still think that the major impact of this would be on the super wealthy in our town. There are a couple of others. There is a business tax, which is also at a very, very low rate, which if we raise it just a little bit, could bring in a lot of money from out-of-state businesses, which sell stuff into the city. That's called the gross receipts tax. And that's within council's power to, it's already on the books. Council could raise the rate of that tax and bring in a lot of money without harming small businesses in the city and making big out-of-town businesses pay a fair share. So it's true that there are limits on both what council can do to raise taxes in a progressive way and what council can do to force the hand of the mayor to spend in a good way. But that doesn't mean that we should not be mobilizing. Last year, communities mobilized against the mayor's excessive allocation of money to the police, and council responded, not well enough, but it did respond by cutting the cap on police department spending. So it's very important for us to mobilize. Steve is going to get into that, how we do that in a moment, with your help. There is also an entirely different budget. We've been talking about the operating budget. That's the budget that indicates how much departments spend on current activities, the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. There's also a capital budget, which is accompanied by a 6-year capital plan. Council considers that at the same time as the operating budget every year. And it basically contains allocations of money for capital expenses, construction expenses, things that will improve existing property or build new property that will last for at least 5 years. Those things are paid back mostly from, or paid for mostly by the proceeds from borrowings. The borrowings are paid off from expenses that are in the operating budget. As mentioned, we have a lot of interest and principal payments on bonds. The proceeds from those bonds are allocated in the capital plan and the capital budget. So how do these budgets get to council, and when and how do our opportunities for engagement with these things arise? And as I said, stay tuned. Steve is going to cover that. Now, I do want to point out that the part of the operating budget process that takes place behind closed doors may be more significant than what we actually see in public. That process starts with the finance director collecting detailed information from every department on the financial conditions of those departments. That's done usually in December or January in the winter. So that includes information on how well the departments are adhering to the budget that was passed and what those departments believe they will need in the next budget. Those reports are then delivered to finance sometime as I said, sometime during the winter. The finance director and mayor review them. They have discussions about them with department heads, and then they decide how they want to allocate next year's resources. After reaching those decisions, the mayor is pretty much ready to draft next year's budget proposal. Last year, many movement groups were active in mobilizing around the council phase of budget deliberations. In my view, we should be equally active in bringing the mid-year review process into the open and exerting our influence at the early stages when decision-making begins and to a great extent is finalized. It's also important to note that mid-year, we have another chance to change and improve the budget that was adopted in June. That would be through transfer ordinances, or a transfer ordinance is what the name implies, a measure that moves money from one place to another, sometimes within a department, say from personnel to contracts, or from one department to another, such as from police to libraries. Transfer ordinances can be used for progressive purposes and be initiated by any council member, but only during the first 8 months of the fiscal year. So if during that time a council member wants to renew the struggle over the police budget, a transfer ordinance would be the way to do that. Once introduced by any member of council, a transfer ordinance is referred to the Appropriations Committee. This year, that's chaired by Council Member Maria Canones Sanchez. It follows the same course as any other bill, with a committee hearing, a vote in committee, then a waiting period of at least 7 days after the bill is reported out, and a final council vote requiring at least 9 votes for passage unless the mayor vetoes the bill, in which case it takes 12 votes to override the veto. At the council hearing, the public is entitled to testify, so it is a focal point for community mobilization if the community is in a position to do that. I want to also point out that the Appropriations Committee has other muscles it can flex if it wants to in moving public opinion around particular budget demands. Although there is only one mandated set of budget hearings a year, budget transfer ordinances, as I've said, they also require hearings in the Appropriations Committee. In addition, the committee can be authorized to hold hearings at any time to look into budget-related matters. When former Mayor Street headed the Appropriations Committee in council, he made life miserable for then Mayor Good by holding frequent hearings and tying up administration personnel until he got what he wanted from them. Public actually wasn't too involved with that process, but if the current or future appropriations chair wanted to do that, hopefully we would insist that we are also at the table at that point. So that's a wrap. I'll be pleased to answer questions when we continue later. Steve.
Awesome, great, thank you, Stan. There's already a couple questions in the inbox, so please keep them coming. Great, so now that we essentially learned what's in the budget, which in terms of revenues, as Stan mentioned, the biggest chunk of money comes from wages, incomes, and property taxes. And just for clarification, for the next section, we have the annual operating budget every year, the capital budget, and 5-year plan. So we're going to move on to the next section of our training. So before we get further down, dive deeper into the budget, I wanted to do a quick activity if you were mayor of the city of Philadelphia. As Stan mentioned, the mayor has significant amount of power in terms of how the budget looks, right? Like the mayor delivers the budget address, the mayor presents council with the budget for each department, right? Like there's the departments and under the mayor's cabinet are presenting their budget with the finance director, which is, a mayor under the mayor's cabinet. So the mayor has a lot of power in the budget. So just, if you were mayor, which of these would you prioritize? I'm going to drop the activity in the chat box, but you should have got it in the email. I'm dropping it in the chat box. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so folks could see just what other folks are doing. And then I'm gonna share my screen. So I just dropped it in the chat box. The goal here is that the program you consider to be the most crucial to you as mayor, you are to move a money bag. Let's just say the money bag could be $1 billion or a few $1 million. I'm going to move it to, let's just say, housing. So all you have to do is move the money bag to the program, department, or issue you think is the most important to you as mayor and the one you would fund. You only can pick one though. It's about 40 people on this call, so I think we have enough money bags, but if there isn't, you could just simply copy and paste on a money bag and then move it somewhere. We'll just give 3 minutes for folks to log on. Make sure everyone should have access. Anyone up? You know what? I already see a problem. Anyone with the link can edit. Sorry about that. You're probably trying to edit now. All right, now everyone should be able to move the money bag. Sorry. Perfect. Right. I'll say it should be. It was definitely hard for me between two of the up. Sorry, there's some questions about. Oh, okay, great. Answering those. Great. Go ahead and log off as soon as you actually drop your money back. So as soon as I see everyone's log off, I can just start the next part. All right, so look like it's about 4 people, a couple more people in here. All right, I'm going to send a screenshot of this as part of the session, but as you can see, it looks like education and city services and housing, but mainly a lot of education. If you were mayor, you would fund, I guess, pre-K, after school programs, et cetera. And then housing, we would have a large amount of money going to the Housing Trust Fund. Our streets department will be well funded to be able to pick up our trash, well paid. As you remember, during COVID-19, the streets department was really overwhelmed, understaffed, folks were getting sick. And the men and women who were doing the job was having a hard time. Miss Paula, you couldn't move your money back. Yeah. Great, looks like everybody's, sorry, if you couldn't move your money back, I'm gonna send this out on a link. You could just put in the chat box as well. So thank you so much for taking part of this. As you can see, this is what our community, if we were in charge, this is what it would reflect. And I just wanna point out that there was only one money bag in the police. And I just wanna be clear, this is completely different, like a complete opposite of what actually happened or what actually happens every year, right? Because the housing trust fund and housing got cut, right? Like, and then the one group, the one piece of department here that has one bag was the department that got the major increase amidst of all these cuts. So I think this is visually just a very interesting thing to see. So thank you so much for taking part of that. All right, let's get back to sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Sorry, I lost the PowerPoint. I'm so sorry, folks. Great, here we go. All right. Sorry. Yep. So, okay, great. Thank you so much for taking part in the activity. So again, I wanted to just restate that only the police department had one money bag. Every other department and issue had a significant number of you folks deciding to fund it as your top priority. And I think that's completely opposite to the reality of what happened during our last budget, given that a mix of all the cuts in the departments, the police department was the only department that got a significant amount increase in their budget. So given that you seem to have a different opinion, we all have a different opinion than the mayor, right? Why do you think that the budget matters? And you could I'm gonna allow folks to just unmute and share. or actually, if you could do me a favor and just raise your hand, I'm going to take questions from there. So if you could usually raise your hand or put in a chat, that would be great. Why do folks think the budget matters, given what we know so far? If you go to participate, you could use the raise your hand icon or put it in the chat. Why does the budget matter, given what we know so far? Okay, great. Samantha, I'm going to unmute you. You are unmuted. Samantha, you can unmute yourself now. Go ahead.
I did. Thank you. Budgets matter because when funds are allocated, we need to know exactly how much we need so that we can keep applying for funds, keep saying how much we need, because we know what we can do with money and be able to just be accountable.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, accountable. Casey, I'm going to unmute you. You should be able to be unmuted, Casey.
Hi, I was going to say budgets matter because it helps you stay on track in regards to how you're spending, and also it helps you prioritize what's most important. That should be what it's for. Unfortunately, in this city, that's not how it usually goes. And it should be a democratic process as well, and that it should fund what the people actually needed to fund. But once again, this city is fund special interests, not people and what they need.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll take one more. Looks like Tanetta is raising. I'll lower you right now, Tanetta. Okay, you should be good to go.
Budgets should show transparency in spending.
Yep. Awesome. Great. Thank you. I'm going to lower your hand. And so, right, so budgets should be transparent. They should fund people, not special interests. They should be accountable to us. So then, why should we engage with the budget process? Again, you could just raise your hand or put it in the chat room. Oh, great. I'm gonna unmute you, Casey. You're unmuted. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Because it's our money to begin with. We fund the city, and they tax us so they can have this budget in part. And then also, because if we don't do engage with the budget, we don't get what we need. And this is why it's important you're having this type of session, because this budget and how it's done and how it's lump sum, that was lump summed on purpose like that, so people won't know what the heck is going on. And most people don't even know there is a city budget, how it works, and it's done in that type of way so that you can't educate yourself, so that you can't fight back. Because once you understand the budget, if more people understood the budget, they would know exactly why defunding police is not such a horrible thing. They would know it can actually help A, B, C, and D if they understood how the budget functions and how it's supposed to function. But when you don't know something, either because you just don't know or it was kept out of your way so you wouldn't know, you don't believe it's important. So it's important that we engage in the budget so we understand where our money is going and make sure it goes where we need it to go.
Absolutely. Yep. Someone else also mentioned it's our money. Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome. So I think, yeah, everyone basically, thank you for sharing that, right? Like it's our money, all of it, and we should be able to keep the folks who are allocating those monies to various departments accountable to us. So again, thank you. The thing is though, when we leave, and the last person just said this brilliantly, right? Like when we leave this thing to politicians, they make it confusing or hard for us and not transparent for us, because when we leave it up to them, they don't often pick our communities, right? They pick special interests, they pick priorities that they like, that are beneficial to other folks and not us. So I think this budget cycle is a perfect example of all of that, what you guys are saying, right? Like Mayor Kinney had to revise the original March budget. So what happens, right? Stan mentioned this earlier. Mayor gives his address in March, then that budget cycle starts. But what happened this budget cycle, even though the mayor had given his budget address and the hearings had started and they were about to adopt the budget, COVID-19 became a major issue. So the mayor had to go back and revise his budget to cut because they anticipated $100 million, millions of dollars of shortfall in revenue. So they couldn't spend as much as they wanted to. So to do that, the mayor basically cut $341 million from his original March proposed budget, cut in initiatives like youth violence prevention programs, workforce development, arts and culture, and much, much more. Even a small program like covering like about $2,000 to help immigrants and refugees who are resettling in our city, cut. In fact, he proposed to completely eliminate the Office of Arts and Culture, laid off hundreds of workers who run our programs in the rec centers, libraries, which I think the speaker mentioned, someone mentioned earlier, libraries have already been suffering from budget cuts since Mayor Nutter's administration, right? And so he continued to neglect and cut the libraries funding. But the Philadelphia Police Department, as we all been saying, got a budget increase. In fact, the mayor wanted to give the police department an additional $19 million in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic while cutting all these programs. And as you see in the slide here, since Mayor Kinney has been in office, the police budget has increased by $121 million. And that's a cool fact. That's a fact that I pulled off a petition right now for folks who are like involved in the defund the police movement, asking the mayor to actually bring the police budget back to its original funding level before he got in office. So that's an important fact to know. So that $19 million, though, advocates fought hard and really fought that decision by the mayor to say enough is enough. They organized, they lobbied members of council. They really not only changed the conversation in council, but they also gave council members the courage to speak out against the mayor, but they changed the public conversation, period. Of course, the defund movement across the nation and the protests against violence against Black people by the police also helped that conversation. But I don't want to take away from like the organizing that happened here in Philly and City Council when that budget became like an important thing in the public eye. Folks were calling in, people were like going in random city hall meetings that really had nothing to do with the budget to talk about the budget. And it became an issue for council that they could not ignore. And the message was clear. It was like, crime is a systematic problem that is caused in our communities when you starve our communities of resources like mental health, education, all of the things you're about to cut. Not increasing police, that's not what's gonna help us. We need you to put these monies back in the budget. And our movement did win, right? Like we saw for the first time in a very long time, the police not getting an increase in their budget at all, right? That $19 million increase was gone. The arts program got money back in the budget. And in fact, the mayor even restored the $20 million to the Housing Trust Fund, which is like, and Stan mentioned those bubbles of funds, right? Like one of those funds that like does work around affordable housing in this city. And so like the fact that he even cut that in the midst of a pandemic where people were trying to figure out housing was really super unfortunate. But because of that organizing, that money was put back. Again, folks did that. The folks that were organizing around the arts program sent in like thousands of emails to council offices. The defund folks were like I said, testifying in every city council meeting. So that was like a really significant win for our people. So the other thing I would mention is that like, so first let's talk about like what engagement looks like in a typical year, non-pandemic year. And I think Stan started to get to this in a little bit in his presentation, right? So typically, this is a chart that I pulled off from the Department of Finance, by the way. They have like these public, like every year they try to create these and update them. So this is from last year. But the one thing that's not on here, I was saying, Stan mentioned, is like around November, December, the budget calls for departments in their estimates for like next year's budget are done by the finance director, like Stan was mentioning. So like between November and early January, there's conversations already happening about the next budget, about like how last budget spending went. So it's important for us to actually be reaching out to people like right now, right? And then late February and then early March, finally, after all those months of conversation between November, December, January, the mayor, and sometime in February and March, gives his public address. But there's after months of like conversations in departments have already happened. This is when the public is like aware of the budget, right? And then once that proposed budget delivery happens in March, then City Council will publish a list of hearings for each of those departments that are getting money. So the public hearings will start after the mayor's address. Essentially, after the weeks of public testimony from the departments, council would then vote on the proposed budget. Someone had asked about the fiscal year. So council has to pass the budget before June 30th. The fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th of every year. So after the March address, all the public hearings, council usually votes at the last council session sometime before on the budget. They have to pass a budget before the fiscal year ends, which is June 30th. So really in this timeline, one of council's main powers is the public process of accountability, right? Because Stan talks about like passing a lump sum budget, the man not having to spend any money that he doesn't want to, figuring out ways to move money around. This is council's power, is the public accountability. So of course, this is a short window to have a major impact on the budget, which is the hearings. It's also one of the only opportunities for the legislative branch city council to have any kind of like accountability of city departments in a real public way, which is the public hearings. So the only thing I will say is that there are a few ways to help council in this process to hold these public, to hold the mayor and these departments accountable. So we'll talk about that in the next slide. But before we move on, in this timeline of the March public hearing address of the mayor, the various city departments come into city council to testify between April, May, and then the final vote sometime at the end of the council session in June. Where do we see like the public being able to like actually have a real major impact? I will say during the public testimony, I'll show this shortly, there's only like really 2 or 3 opportunities for the public to testify. So like after all the departments go, there's an opportunity for the public, after all the city departments come in front of city council and they testify, there's like an opportunity for the public to also testify. And then after the school district goes, there's also another opportunity for the public to testify, right? So it's like very few opportunities for the public to testify. The public testimony also is you're only allowed 2 to 3 minutes. And sometimes like they did this year, they can choose to only allow a certain number of people to testify. Like because so many people wanted to testify this year, city council president was like, okay, we're only gonna let 40 people testify on the school budget or on the city budget regardless. So it's important, there are other ways to like actually also like get your testimony heard as well. So we'll just move on for the sake of time. So one way of doing that, right? Like you can sign up to testify in front of city council for the budget hearings, but because they're 2 to 3 minutes, one thing I will say is you should write your council letter, your district council person a letter, a more detailed testimony about your concerns around the budget. After you hear the mayor's address, after you hear what the department person has to say, if the police commissioner says something like, we're gonna use this money to buy more facial recognition technology, right? You should testify against that, for example, and then write a more detailed letter about your concern, send that to the police commissioner and send that to your district council person and people you think will champion that. Because your testimony is so limited and you might not get a chance to testify. You can also send a letter, right? Like with your neighbors signed on or other community groups that are signed on, asking with the clear acts of saying, please do not give the police more money to basically monitor Black and brown people in our communities, right? So you can make sure you have a clear ask. The other thing you could do is you could call your council person, and this is something when I worked in council, I felt like folks didn't do enough of. Make them work for you. The budget is 2,000 pages. If there's if issue you have a concern about, you want to know how the budget impacts that, ask your council person to send you a one-page fact sheet on that issue and how that budget is going to impact that issue. When I worked in council, we tried to do that on the issues we were working on, but I know for a fact not every council office is proactive in doing that. So you should be able to call them to ask them to do that for you. Another thing is like getting involved with groups like Neighborhood Networks, the Alliance for Just Philadelphia, and Our City, Our Schools. They will be doing a lot of issue campaigns related to the budgets when it comes to the school district, the police, and appropriations, all of those other budget-related things in the upcoming few months. So reach out to them, get involved. They also have petitions you can circulate around. For example, the Alliance for Just Philadelphia had a people's budget that they outlined what the priorities should be, and it was a petition. I will drop that in the chat box. You could also make sure once you get involved with those groups, help them circulate those petitions, and then get involved in their campaigns as well. The other thing you can do, and I know we talked about this in the last couple sessions, attend budget hearings and register to speak. Right now they're online, but when it was not a pandemic, you can go and you can sign up to testify. But right now, testimonies are being done online, but you can still sign up to testify, and I will show folks how to do that in an email that I send out. You can also attend council hearings on Thursdays because the budget hearings are separate from council hearings, right? You should still be able to go to council hearings to like have conversations with your council members about the issues that you care about. Again, those are online right now, so it's hard to do that in person. Similar to like going to the caucus room. If you get involved in the Alliance for Just Philadelphia fight for people's budget, right? Go to the caucus room where all of the council people will be in the room, talk to them. If you do a petition with your neighbors about, let's just say your street has not been cleaned for months, or like there's trash everywhere. You write a letter, get your neighbors to sign it saying the street department is clearly overwhelmed. Like, what are you guys doing to make sure this happen? Go to city council in a real public way during the caucus room, hand that letter to your council person, right? The caucus room is always a good place to be. Again, register to speak. And the final thing I would say is like meet with council members and the mayor's team like right now for the next budget. We are in the current fiscal year, right? We started July 1st and we'll end June 30th. But conversations for the next budget, you should be having those right now so that when council comes back in January, they can have your input. I will say it's important to meet with these folks because I've seen council members use statements from people that they speak with during budget hearings. Like I've seen Cheryl Parker and district folks do this a lot. Like if you tell them like you have a concern about a department, they might ask the department head, my constituent has this concern. So it's important to talk to them way before the budget hearings start. And this is another one, I've seen this done a couple of times really well. I will say Councilmember Cheryl Parker, every year after the mayor's budget address, she does about 11 town halls in her district that outlines the budget and how it's going to be spent. And I could be wrong, but she is the only district council person that does that. I think that's something that should be offered for all the districts. That would be amazing. I think it's really well done. It's it empowers her constituents. You can also do this with your community groups and invite your district council person to come answer some questions. I don't think enough of that is done. And finally, yeah, just target department heads way before this budget conversation starts. This is super important because Stan was saying that between November and December, department heads are going to be sending documents for next year's budgets, right? Like what their axes are. They're also going to be talking about how they spent that money, and they're going to be presenting that to the mayor's folks. So having those conversations with them now will let you know all the important information that you need to for the next budget, right? Like we should be contacting the labor, Rich Lazard, the Department of Labor. What are you doing in this fiscal year with this money? How have you spent this money? Because we know it's a lump sum. Show us the receipts, essentially, right? Like you should be having those conversations now. I didn't mention the Coalition to Respect Every Worker. They have been working on getting the Labor Department more money to like enforce labor laws in the city better. So they are in continuous conversation with the Department of Labor because they fought really hard for the Labor Department to get more money in the budget. Now they're fighting to keep the Department of Labor accountable to actually enforce labor laws. So it's a continuous conversation you want to keep happening. And the only other thing I wanted to show folks, this is an amazing website. Not every commissioner has done this, so I don't know if this is something that will continue, but the current, the current city controller has an amazing website where she literally shows you like budget increases, budget decreases from this year's budget, from the proposed original budget, from the revised budget to what was actually adopted. And she does this for every department with detailed explanation. And you can see department large cuts. And like I mentioned before, homeless services, parks and recs, streets departments, right? Like the library, like this is a very detailed, like interactive tool, but there's also like other stuff you can do in this website, and we'll send it to you folks as well. And then I don't know if I've done, and then there's the City Council Budget Center. You can always go here, City Council's Budget Center, to see, like once the mayor delivers his budget, council will usually do a brief analysis of the budget and post it here, right? So this is the 5-year plan proposed. You can just click on here and see it. This is the capital program. This is the operating budget. You can click on here and see it. More importantly, this is all of the dates for all the city departments' testimonies, right? So you can see when a specific department that you're interested in is coming to testify, but also when public testimony is being offered. Obviously everything's online, so it's here. Public testimony is a couple of hours long, but as you can see, it's just here, and there should be one more after the school district. I'm not sure why it's here, but after the school district goes, there's also public testimony on the school district specifically. So there's very few opportunities for us to testify. So that is the 2 places where you can go to get some resources. Great, and I will drop the petition for the Alliance for Just Philadelphia. All right, so let's get to some Q&A and just comments from folks. I'm gonna unmute everyone, so feel free to just speak as you see fit. So let's start with some questions. Start of the line. All right, I think folks should be able to unmute themselves.
Okay. I have a question. Basically, is the reason we're lining the pockets of Wall Street banks, the city is borrowing money from them? Is that where we borrow money from?
That's go ahead, Stan. Public bank plug. Oh, I'm gonna unmute you, Stan. You go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, the city borrows money in the bond market, and the big banks underwrite many of those bond issuances. So they clean up in fees, and they have a corner on that market. Neighborhood Networks, I should mention, is trying to create a public bank. And I don't know how many people know about it, and we could take a couple of sessions to talk about a public bank. But if we had a public bank which would recycle the city's money through our own institution rather than putting it in these big banks, which just suck up our wealth. If we had that, we could actually borrow money at a much, much lower rate. And you will probably be hearing more about that, particularly if you get on our email list. We think that we have a really decent chance to create a Philadelphia public bank in the near future.
Hey, Casey, I'm gonna unmute you. You can unmute. You should be able to unmute yourself, actually.
Hello. So you said comments and questions. I
Yep.
kind of had a part, it's like a comment and question. I put in the chat box, I was curious if anyone was familiar with the process of participatory budgeting, where when you were talking about how the public should get involved, how it should be a public process, besides testimony and contacting your elected official and having them come to meet you and hearings or having like the way Councilwoman Parker was doing, there's another process called PB, participatory budgeting, where basically there's money allocated to each city council person to improve the neighborhood, like $1 million. And they would just take the money that's already in the budget. You're not asked for new money, it's already in there to do what the community actually wants. So the way we just voted on education, housing, police, and something else on that list, that's something how you would vote for in your neighborhood. So do you want to improve the school? You want to improve the parks? You want to improve whatever the corridor, the business corridor, and you and your neighbors decide that. And the money is already in the budget, capital budget, I believe, for each city council person. It's a public process. And I was wondering if anybody's working on that in Philly. I know there's a process you have to go through to get it to be law, but I was thinking long-term, short-term learn about it, long-term organizing around making it something that the people can vote on as a ballot question in the future and making it law. So that when people come to community development and different things, it's part of the community agreement that you have to do a PB process to actually hear what the community wants and fund it. So I was curious if people knew about it. We're doing something like that already. And I left the link in the chat. I'll leave it again so you can learn more about what that could maybe look like here.
Yeah, I don't. So a lot of folks have been talking about Councilwoman Cheryl Parker's town halls are still not right. Like they don't go far enough to. We can't call them like participatory budgeting in a real way because.
Oh, no, I was just naming examples of public participation, how PB goes beyond that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. We definitely, there's nobody that I know that's working on that in a real way. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stan, but there's been a lot of conversations about it. Folks are really excited about the possibility, but there's no active campaign to actually make participatory budgeting a thing in Philadelphia. So if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to join the Alliance for Just Philadelphia, who is, like I said, which neighborhood networks is a part of, that's going to be really throwing down on budget stuff. And that's a conversation we should keep having. And maybe that could be realized in the future, right?
You said Just Philadelphia?
Yeah, I'll drop Neighborhood Network's email link for the public banking, which is another good one. And then I'll drop Alliance Table's petition as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question.
Go ahead. I was about to unmute you.
Excuse me. So we don't make any money from taxes off of the stadiums. Is that what the case is?
Yes. There's a little bit of money from the amusement tax, but they actually wrote into the lease that if there are further increases in the amusement tax, they won't apply to the stadiums and tickets to go to the ball games. It was an amazing, probably the biggest corporate giveaway in the history of the city. A billion, we're subsidizing those stadiums to the tune of $1 billion over 30 years.
We should be making a lot of hoopla about that bull crap. Excuse me.
I agree. I made a lot of hoopla when I was on the staff of city council, and they could care less.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
They wouldn't even pass an amendment to it, which required the owners to pay a living wage to their janitors. They got all this money, and they wanted to pay the people who clean up after everybody else the minimum wage.
I have a
It's
question.
horrific.
Go ahead, Beth.
It sounds to me like when Stan, you described our budget process, that we have a very strong mayor, weak city council process.
Yes.
And I have two questions. One is, are we unique in the state of Pennsylvania with that kind of process? And two, can we ever go back and reverse that? How would we do that to give council more power?
Mhm. Well, I'm not really sure. I have the feeling that it's similar in at least Pittsburgh. I think there are strong council structures, particularly mostly in smaller municipalities. But yeah, so it's not uniform. And in terms of changing it, we could amend the charter. Amending the charter requires a 2/3 vote of city council and approval in a referendum.
Has council ever tried it recently?
No, because it's a little bit like, I don't know, it's a little bit like why Congress doesn't take back any of the power they've ceded to the president. It's just been this way for so long. And also because the powers that be, the Chamber of Commerce in particular, finds it much easier to direct the way things are going by just having to deal with the one guy behind closed doors. And they don't want to have to share that power with 17 other elected officials. But that's not to say, that we shouldn't try to do that. We should at some point. There are so many other things that all of us are occupied with, but we should, I think, have that in our minds. And when enough folks are really engaged with the budget process, maybe we can dive a little bit deeper than just to deal with the annual battles within the existing structure and talk about changing that structure.
Thank you.
To include some elements of participatory budgeting. I mean, certainly that would be something that I think ought to be on the table.
Any more questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are you tired of me asking questions?
We're not. Go ahead, you're unmuted. You can unmute yourself. Ms. Taneda?
Oh, that was my question. Excuse me.
That's how it is. No, I am not tired of you. One of the things I also just want to make sure I don't forget is that I'm sure a lot of folks on this call know about the activity fund grants, money that city council folks get during the budget process. This is like a $2-3 million budget item that basically it falls within the Department of Rec, I believe.
I'm pretty sure that's where it is, yeah.
Yeah, that gives district council members a lot of power over like how that money is used. And so they use it oftentimes, right, to like build their political, quite frankly, the political muscle, and they give checks to groups and entities that supports them in some way. I just want to mention that because that, in addition to councilmatic prerogative, it starts to build on why district council folks have more power than at-large folks. So the 7 at-large folks, they, other than their budget items for like their office and staff, they don't have activity grant money to give to nonprofits in Philadelphia. So yeah, like your district council person, if you're like having a block party, you need $500 as a nonprofit, you can go to them to to get the money. Or if you're a nonprofit doing gun violence initiatives and you need $6,000 for something, you can go to your district council folks to do that. That gives them a lot of power in your district.
Just to be clear, that's not appropriated in the budget, except again in that lump sum in the contract section of the rec department's budget. But there are agreements that that the mayor will spend that amount according to how the council members want it to be spent. And it's one of the ways in which mayors exert a lot of control over council members by giving them that large S to spread around.
I dropped an article that covered just the corruption and the activity grant money like last year.
Hi, this is Casey again. Just two suggestions as we're sitting here talking about different things. So like to keep the momentum going, if people were interested, I don't know who, but I'm just throwing it out there. Like after this is all said and done, because you have all these people here who are obviously interested in learning about how city council functions and how the budget functions and they're active in their community or want to become active in their community. I was thinking, as I mentioned before, like there's two ways that this can like go where you can organize people in this group around different things. So one of them being find out people's interests, education, housing, poverty, whatever it is, and then letting people know or helping people find out when there is hearings and different things where they can testify and keep showing up to those different things. So by like the fifth time, they're like, oh, this person's here about this, but talk about different elements of it as you go each time to make yourself known. And it should build it, like send 5 people, then send 10 people, then send 15 people. So we can just start showing interest in that we're invested in seeing them be held accountable for their actions. And then the next, that's short term. Long term is the PB process, trying to figure out a way to get that on the ballot in the future election so the public can vote on whether or not they want that as a department, a charter, if they want to implement that as a citywide thing. So when it comes to issues like gentrification, development, it can kind of be, it can't be stopped right now, but it can be slowed down so that people actually have a say in what's going on in the neighborhood and money to back it up. So that's just 2 ways I'm thinking of how maybe you can organize people to continue what we're doing. So when because I don't want to just learn this and then nothing happens, because that's what happens, you learn it and you're like, what am I supposed to do now? There might be 2 ways you can do something.
Oh, don't worry, that's not going to happen here.
I'm just going by other experiences I've had in the past where you kind of learn stuff and it's like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And now I know what to do next, but I'm just putting it out there what other people might want to do and what you might want to do as an organizer with these people here who I'm guessing would be interested in something like that. If not, at least just thinking about the idea at most.
Yep. That brings me to, I think we're good, unless there's no more question, I think that brings me to the final. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Paulette.
I have pretty much a statement because I try to read through the things that you put in the chat because once we offer here, it's gone. I would like that information to be sent to us in some way that I can have it in paper form that I can look through it and go over it and stop trying to copy all those papers. But one thing that I saw that caught my eye, it says, no one follows the money. How the heck is that going on? And they're telling us that no one follows this money, that it's just given to them and they can do whatever they want to do with it. And it's after our taxes.
Should I say something? I could.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, the city controller, depending on how good the controller is, can do performance audits of various departments to determine if the money is being spent in accordance with the charter and is being effectively spent. The last city controller did a lot of that. Frankly, I'm not that sure about the current city controller, but that's within her power. And then city council can really can continue, if it chooses to, it can pretty continuously monitor how the administration spends money. It could have a continuing investigation of whatever departments it wants to look at and can have city officials appear before the Appropriations Committee or other committees on a regular basis. It depends. I mean, that's why we want to elect good city councils that care about these things. But the power is there to monitor what's going on if the will is there.
That's the big if.
Yep.
Just a side note, basically, it's not really, it doesn't matter if it's an if, you're gonna force their hand, they're gonna do it. You have to make them do it. They're not gonna do it because you're not nice to them. You can be nice about it, but you're gonna have to force hands of people because they're used to operating a certain way. You're gonna have to force the issue. That's why I said organize. Show 5, 10, 15, start showing your power and influence so you're not playing around with them and they'll start doing what they're supposed to do. They think you're playing, I think, because people are not as organized as they used to be, because they're showing you're not playing with them.
So we will definitely be reaching out to you all as we start thinking about not just the next budget cycle, right? But I think groups are starting to think about what the appropriations of funds could look like in this current budget cycle. Because as Stan's mentioned, right, you still have 8 months in the first 8 months in the fiscal year where council could have an impact and appropriate money and move money around. So there are groups still thinking. I know the Alliance Table. Stan, I always get the group wrong. The Budget Working Group. What is it?
There are so many names. There are two groups. There's one. There's a subgroup of the Alliance that's working on the spending side, and then there's a progressive revenue group which is working on the revenue side. So
Exactly.
those are two different groups.
Yeah, and if you if you join Neighborhood Network's email list, and then you join Alliance Table, you will get information about like stuff we're doing around the budget. I just want to again say if folks could fill out the survey for me before you go, that would be great. The other thing is we will likely not have a session next week because of my as my org gets deeper into election work. I'm gonna need a break to actually make sure our democracy goes according to plan. So we probably will have a session next week. But when we come back, we will come back with the committee session as well as the award session. And then the plan is for the teach-ins, folks, we will have guest speakers talk about issues around city council. So like our plan is to have the folks doing the defund the police work be part of our first teach-in, hopefully, to talk about what that looks like. Specifically because there was current legislation in city council that's trying to make the police contract a more public process within council. So we're gonna have folks come talk about what that looks like. And then hopefully we'll have folks come talk about like just other council related stuff. So the teach-ins will be specific to issues currently going on in city council and how we can take actions on those. So hopefully we will see you guys back in November. To get
a lot of smiles.
Just thinking about the next week. It's gonna be so cool. Make sure you go vote, and if you didn't vote yet, you still have time to vote. I will send an email about where and how you can vote as well. So it's going to be a large email, so look out for that email sometime next week, Monday or Tuesday. All right, awesome. So,
and I want to say thank you to you, Steve and Stan. Very informative. Once again, I've learned a lot, and I think it can benefit me and helping others.
Thank you, Ms. Senator. Yeah, definitely. If you can, I'm staying here, but feel free to sign the survey for us if you can. That would be great. Survey. All right.
Steve, is there any chance to get involved with the group that's doing the defund the police work, even though I know that I missed the beginning part of that group meeting?
If you email me personally, I can connect you, but I believe there's a large number of, I can send you an email about like groups that are doing the work. I think Reclaim Philadelphia is one of them. Free the Ballot is one of them. Philly Rural Coalition for Justice is one of them. So if you email me, I can just send you some like resources of folks. And I could also directly contact you with the mass liberation organizer for Reclaim Philadelphia as well.
Okay, I did email you last week about it, so I thought I would just ask in person, but I'll follow up again.
Please do. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay.
Once you
Getting
do the
off-
survey, you could feel free to hop off, folks. I'm just gonna stay here for another 5 minutes so folks could do the survey. But
Okay.
you should hop off if you've done the survey. Thank you again. See you in November. Go vote if you haven't voted already.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. All right, I'm effectively ending the call. All right, see you all. And Ms. Katrisa, I will email you tonight. All right, thanks for being a very active participant. All right, see y'all in November. Bye.